Hey, I'm Pastor Justin, and I'm here with another Snapshots from the Bible. I know it's been a couple weeks, so we got to make this one extra special, right? And if we're going to make something special, we're going to go to the book of Malachi. It's one of the Old Testament prophets. Now, one misconception about Old Testament prophets is that all they do is prophesy. They present prophecies of the future. And a lot of times we get very interested in that and thinking, what about the future can we find out by reading the prophets? But actually, future oracles were a very, very small part of what the prophets presented. The prophets were a conduit, they were messengers. God would send them to the people to share a message. And more often than not, a large, large part of what prophets did was to enforce the covenant, to remind the people of the covenant that they had with God, the sacred agreement that was forged in blood that God was upholding, but the people were breaking. And the book of Malachi is really just a list of all the ways people are breaking the covenant and how they can restore it. And it's a good reminder for us because even though we're under a new covenant, a lot of these things still apply and the same sins are still going on in our lives. So I wanted to look today at Malachi 3. Malachi 3. And we're going to start in verse 6. It's a pretty famous passage when we talk about what we do with our money. And that's always a sensitive topic. People don't like to be told what to do with their money. But this is a good reminder that when a church has a time for an offering, it's not us as a way of grubbing money or looking for a handout. It's a way to worship God. And we're offering a time to worship God. So we're going to look at this in Malachi chapter 3, starting with verse 6. I, the Lord, do not change. God does not change. I love that. We need to remember that. I, the Lord, do not change, so you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. Ever since the time of your ancestors, you have turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. It's a great promise. Return to me. You guys have fallen away. Return to me, and I'll return to you. I'll forgive you. I'll come back. I'll be your God. God is nothing if not generous. But you ask, continuing on in verse 7, you ask, how are we to return? And God responds, will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? God responded, in tithes and in offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. So let's stop there really quick. God asks us to tithe and offer just a portion of what he gives to us. A tithe is 10% of our gross income, of whatever we get. If we're farmers, 10% of our fields. If we work, it's 10% of our money. And he says, bring that to me as a tithe. I have given you 100%. You give me back and respond 10%. And that's a tithe. Offering is anything above and beyond that. So you want to offer 15%, 20%, whatever above and beyond is an offering. And the Lord is saying to Israel here, you guys aren't bringing any tithes, or whatever tithes you're bringing are so minuscule that there's no way that it's 10%. You're not even going the bare minimum. And I forget where I read this, but in the church today, I think it's something like maybe 10% of the church of active churchgoers tithe 10%. 10% tithe the bare minimum. And they bring that bare minimum to the Lord's storehouse for his ministry. So Malachi is reminding them, you're breaking the covenant. Part of that covenant is that you're going to follow God, you're going to honor him, you're going to obey him, and you're going to tithe to him. And you guys aren't doing that. So you're doing that. So God says, bring that whole tithe into the storehouse so that there may be food in my house. But then God goes on. He doesn't just say, hey guys, do it because I told you to. But our God is gracious. Remember that always. God is gracious and he goes above and beyond. He continues in verse 10. He says, test me in this. Bring that whole tithe, that 10% tithe. Test me in that, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before all is ripe. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land. God is saying, test me. Test me in your tithes. Test me with your money. It's us as Americans, we want to hold on to our money as tightly as possible. I know everybody, the government wants to share, insurance wants to share. It seems like everyone wants a cut of your money. But when God comes to you looking for what is rightfully his, which is 100%, 100% of what everything you own is the Lord's. But he's asking you, he says, I'm going to give it to you. And this is going to be a test to see how much you love me. Give me back 10%. Give me back a tithe. And then find out what happens, because what happens is I'm going to throw open the floodgates. I'm going to pour down blessing upon you. That blessing may not be monetary, by the way. You may give 10% to the church or 10% in your offering, and God may not give you 20% back. I've heard pastors preach that. That's not what God is preaching. He says, I will pour out blessings upon you. Those blessings may be tangible, they may be intangible. You may be storing up treasures in heaven, but God guarantees you that whatever you give to him, he's going to return to you tenfold, 100-fold. Just pour out. I mean, the image there of a floodgate opening, of a wall of water just rushing out, is something you can't deny. So that's my encouragement to you. It's not a guilt trip. It's an encouragement. Tithe. Bring your offering to God's storehouse, and then see what God does in your life as a result. God bless. This is Pastor Justin. I'll talk to you again next week.